28 years. A case that has haunted America still remains unsolved. Investigations that seemed like they would reveal the truth have instead ended up in dead ends. This is the case of JonBenét Ramsey, the beautiful 6-year-old girl murdered on Christmas night in 1996. A child prodigy, an angel loved by the whole of America, but she will never grow up. Recently, in an exclusive, shocking interview on The Banfield Show, John Ramsey, JonBenét's father, revealed details that, according to him, could completely change the way the world perceives this case. Unpublished details, other suspects that were forgotten, and the unforgivable mistakes made by Boulder police. All of this will be analyzed in today's video. Before we dive into the journey to seek justice for JonBenét, don't forget to leave a like and hit the subscribe button to support me in continuing to make in-depth videos like this. I hope you have a truly reflective moment as we explore this case together. Now, let's begin the journey of revisiting the JonBenét Ramsey case through the latest shocking revelations from her own father. In the latest interview, John Ramsey not only expressed his frustration with the police investigation, but also revealed another suspect outside of the family, someone who has seemingly been forgotten by the media and police for many years. And it's not just one person, but at least 4 or 5 people who approached the Ramsey family with compelling information about potential suspects, but all of it was ignored. And when mentioning the shocking details that John Ramsey revealed, the first name we need to talk about is Chris Wolfe, a suspect that, according to the Ramsey family, should have been thoroughly investigated from the very beginning. But the strange thing is that, to this day, after nearly 3 decades, Chris Wolfe remains a shadow that has never been seriously addressed. Chris Wolfe is not a stranger to those who have followed this case since the 90s. At the time JonBenét was murdered, Wolfe was a freelance journalist living in Boulder, Colorado. But what makes people shiver is that Wolfe had suspicious connections and strange behaviors before and after the crime occurred. A woman named Jacqueline, who later approached the Ramsey family, claimed that she had indirect evidence suggesting that Chris Wolfe could have been directly involved in JonBenét's death. What raises big questions is that Jacqueline had repeatedly approached Boulder police to present her findings about Chris Wolfe, but according to John Ramsey, what she said was ignored, and she was never properly investigated. Even when the Ramsey family hired private investigators to check the suspicions surrounding Wolfe, they also found very significant signs. But Boulder police remained adamant about focusing the investigation on the family. They ignored all other possibilities. And here's the part that leaves everyone stunned. John Ramsey stated that he doesn't even know if the police ever collected and compared Chris Wolfe's DNA with the foreign DNA found on JonBenét's clothes. Imagine this: a murder case with unidentified DNA from the suspect, but a person like Wolfe, who is a suspect, has not had his DNA compared? What justice can there be for JonBenét? One thing we all probably understand very well is that DNA technology in 1996 was limited. But today, with the tremendous advancements in forensic science, we can completely reanalyze that DNA sample. However, if the police refuse to check, no matter how advanced the technology, it cannot provide an answer. And when John Ramsey, a father who has suffered for 28 years, says, "I don't know if they did it or not," it's a tremendous disappointment for those who believe in justice. And let's also remember, Chris Wolfe was not the only suspect that Boulder police overlooked. But out of all the names, Wolfe was the one, according to Jacqueline and independent investigators, who showed the clearest and most compelling signs for further investigation. But sadly, the story of Chris Wolfe has almost completely disappeared from popular documentaries about the JonBenét case, including the Netflix documentary that many consider to be the definitive take on the case. A detail that even John Ramsey himself has questioned. Why? Why don't they mention this person? And perhaps when hearing this, we start to realize that the JonBenét case is not just a family tragedy, but also a story about how the investigative system and the media together neglected justice for a child. Next, we'll talk about the second suspect, Gary Oliva, a name that chills us even more than Chris Wolf, a man with a history of sexual offenses who lived right near the Ramsey house, and his chilling confessions later on. Stay tuned to understand why Gary Oliva should have been the prime suspect. But just like Wolf, he was never fully investigated. A suspect who, according to many private investigators, should have been given more attention by Boulder police than anyone else. But strangely, like Chris Wolf, he was never truly investigated seriously. Gary Oliva is a name well known to the residents of Boulder at the time JonBenét was murdered. A homeless man, previously convicted of child sexual offenses, and most importantly, Oliva lived just a few blocks away from the Ramsey family home. That means he was right in the neighborhood, familiar with the area, and fully capable of gaining access to JonBenét's house on that fateful Christmas night. But what is even more troubling are the things Oliva has confessed. Evidence shows that Gary Oliva once told a friend in prison that he accidentally killed a little girl. And did you know that when he was arrested for another crime in 2000, police found pictures of JonBenét in his backpack, pictures that no one understood why he had kept them for so many years. A man with a clear criminal past, living near the victim's home, keeping photos of the victim, and even allegedly making an indirect confession to the crime, but never subjected to DNA testing to compare with the foreign DNA found on JonBenét's body. This raises a huge question. Why? Why was such a suspect overlooked? John Ramsey, in the interview on Banfield, also emphasized that Gary Oliva was one of the key names that the Ramsey family's private investigative team specifically paid attention to. They provided information about Oliva to Boulder police very early on. But, just like Jacqueline and Chris Wolf, the information about Oliva was silenced, and no one ever spoke about it again. Looking back at this case, perhaps what haunts many people, especially those who have witnessed other major cases in their lives, is how obvious suspects like Oliva were ignored. For decades, the focus was on the pain of the Ramsey family instead of seeking the real truth. You know, if Gary Oliva's DNA had been tested and compared with the samples found on JonBenét's body, perhaps everything could have been solved long ago. But no, for some reason, Boulder police chose to overlook the most basic investigative steps. And the story doesn't stop there. John Ramsey also shared that when he recently met with the Boulder police chief, he directly asked whether they had tested the DNA of suspects like Oliva. And sadly, the answer was, "We can't share that." Such an answer, to a father who has lost his child for 28 years, is a heartbreaking cruelty. It shows that this case has not only been buried by time, but also by the very people who should have uncovered the truth. So now we have at least two names, Chris Wolf and Gary Oliva, people with numerous suspicions, yet they have never been subjected to DNA testing to match with the samples found at the scene. Can these mistakes be corrected? Is there still a chance to bring the truth to light? In the next section, we'll discuss the most serious mistakes made in the early stages of the investigation. Mistakes that led the case into a dead end and may forever prevent the truth from being revealed. Let's continue this journey, because JonBenét deserves to be heard, to be protected, even if it's too late. To understand why the JonBenét Ramsey case has remained unsolved for 28 years, we cannot overlook the significant mistakes made in the crucial first hours after the case was discovered. Mistakes that I believe anyone who has followed major cases in American history would say, if only they had done it right from the start, perhaps things would have been different. First, let's rewind to that fateful morning, December 26, 1996. The Boulder police received a call from the Ramsey family reporting that JonBenét had gone missing, leaving behind a suspicious ransom note. But did you know that when the police arrived at the scene, they didn't treat it as a kidnapping or a murder case? Instead, they almost treated it like a simple family situation. Instead of securing the crime scene tightly, they allowed friends and neighbors to come and go freely. These people, with good intentions, tried to help, but by doing so, they inadvertently destroyed some of the most crucial evidence at the crime scene. From strange footprints, marks on the floor, to items in JonBenét's room, all were touched, moved, or cleaned. Imagine, this was one of the most complex murder cases, and yet the police allowed outsiders to freely roam the area, completely obliterating any evidence. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a devastating failure for the investigation process. But that's not all. JonBenét's body was found in the Ramsey basement, not by the police, but by John Ramsey himself. And instead of stopping him to preserve the crime scene, the police allowed him to pick up his daughter and move her from the basement to the floor above, losing all potential evidence that might have remained on her body or in the surrounding area. Think about it. In a murder case, the victim's body is the most critical piece of evidence. Moving the body without the supervision of a coroner is an unacceptable mistake. Yet, this happened in the heart of America, in a case everyone knew was incredibly serious. And, worse still, before the case could even get started, Boulder police quickly closed off other avenues of investigation and focused all their suspicions on the Ramsey family. They believed the family was the culprit and disregarded the possibility that someone had broken into the house and murdered JonBenét. John Ramsey recalls that on that very day, a female detective looked him in the eye and said, "I know you're the killer because I can see it in your eyes." Can you imagine? A murder investigation where the determination of the killer was based on eye contact? No evidence, no testing, no proper examination of the crime scene. Just a personal feeling. And it was this mindset that caused them to ignore or discard any evidence that didn't fit their family did it theory. Let me remind you of what was overlooked. The foreign DNA found on JonBenét's clothing, DNA that didn't match anyone in the family, but no one bothered to identify its true owner. The strange footprints found near where her body was discovered, no follow-up investigation. The broken basement window, possibly the point of entry for the killer, but dismissed. The testimonies about suspects like Chris Wolf and Gary Oliva, not thoroughly investigated. As you can see, all crucial leads were ignored for one simple reason. The police decided from the start that the Ramsey family was responsible, and they did everything to reinforce that belief instead of seeking the truth. Many may ask, why did the police choose this direction in the investigation? Was it because of public pressure? Was it because they wanted to quickly close a complicated case? Or is there another reason we don't know about? But whatever the reason, the one who paid the price for these mistakes was JonBenet and her family, who spent decades living in suspicion, torment, and pain. We, the outsiders, can look back on this case and see clearly. If Boulder police had done their job that day, secured the crime scene, protected the evidence, and conducted a thorough and objective investigation, perhaps the killer of JonBenet would have been caught long ago. But now, with so much vital evidence likely gone, the chance of uncovering the truth seems slimmer than ever. Next, we'll analyze the foreign DNA sample, the key piece of evidence needed to identify the killer, and the reasons why, to this day, that DNA has not yet brought justice to JonBenet. Can modern technology give us the ability to reopen the case, or will the truth forever remain buried? Let's continue this journey to seek justice for JonBenet, because as I always say, even though 28 years have passed, she deserves to know the truth. Now we delve into one of the most critical issues of the JonBenét Ramsey case, and a question that, for nearly 30 years, no one has been able to answer satisfactorily. Who does the foreign DNA found on JonBenét's clothing belong to? And why, to this day, has it not been properly matched with potential suspects? From the moment the case began, the foreign DNA on JonBenét's clothes was considered golden evidence. Evidence that, if thoroughly investigated, could have provided a definitive answer to the case. But do you know what happened? Instead of focusing on the DNA sample to expand the investigation, Boulder police nearly ignored it because it didn't align with the Ramsey family as the perpetrator theory that they had formed from the very beginning. Let me remind you, this DNA did not match John Ramsey, Patsy Ramsey, or Burke Ramsey. No one in the family was linked to this DNA, So the obvious question should be, who left their DNA on JonBenét's clothes, and why did no one pursue the true owner of it? John Ramsey, in an exclusive interview with Banfield, also emphasized that for many years, his family has continuously asked the police to compare this DNA with potential suspects like Chris Wolf and Gary Oliva. But the answer he received was always silence or a polite refusal stating, "We cannot disclose the progress of the investigation." But think about it. Does it really take nearly 30 years to compare a DNA sample with a publicly named list of suspects? In 1996, technology might have been limited. But today, DNA analysis technology has come a long way. Now, we have next-generation DNA sequencing, NGS, environmental DNA analysis, and, most importantly, genetic genealogy. This is the technology that helped solve cases that seemed impossible, like the Golden State Killer case, a notorious serial killer caught after over 40 years thanks to DNA found through genealogy. So the question is, why hasn't Boulder Police applied these technologies to solve the JonBenét case? And perhaps this is the most heartbreaking part for us. If they had done so, if they had cooperated with independent forensic companies, the identity of the killer could have been revealed within just a few months. But until today, everything remains silent. John Ramsey also revealed that he and those who support the family have repeatedly asked the police to allow the DNA sample to be sent to reputable private labs like Parabon Nanolabs or Othram Labs, labs known for solving cold cases. But that request has never been accepted. This raises many questions. Is it possible that Boulder Police are afraid that if the true perpetrator is found, they will have to face the catastrophic mistakes they've made over the past 28 years? Are they afraid to admit that they've wasted nearly 3 decades chasing the wrong person, while the real killer remains free? And if we look deeper, perhaps you and I would ask, is there anyone other than the killer benefiting from the case never being solved? There could be many reasons, but whatever the reason, the ones who have suffered the most are the Ramsey family, who for 28 years have lived in suspicion, branded as monsters in the eyes of the public, while they too are victims of the most horrific tragedy a family can face, the loss of a child. And you know, when talking about the DNA sample, John Ramsey said something that I think anyone would find heartbreaking. We can't conduct the DNA test ourselves. We don't have the legal authority to do that. Only Boulder Police have the authority, and they didn't do it. So the final question for all of us is, if the opportunity to solve the case is right in front of us, why isn't it being seized? Justice for JonBenét is right within reach. Why let it slip through our fingers? And the most important question, we, the ones listening and following this case, will we accept this case being buried like this? Or will we speak up to demand justice for a 6-year-old girl? Now, I will walk with you to examine the role of the media in this case. Why do details like the DNA sample, the suspect Chris Wolf, or Jacqueline, the crucial witness, never appear in popular documentaries like Netflix's? And is it possible that someone is deliberately controlling the narrative the public is allowed to know? Continuing from what we've discussed about the mysterious DNA sample, there's another question that I believe anyone who has followed the JonBenét Ramsey case must ask. Why are these crucial details never mentioned in the media? Why do pieces of evidence like the foreign DNA, the suspect Chris Wolf, or Jacqueline, the key witness, completely disappear from famous documentaries? And this is also something that John Ramsey, JonBenét's father, openly addressed in his interview with Banfield. He said that he cannot understand why the most important stories of the case have been systematically forgotten. You know, the Netflix documentary released a few years ago attracted millions of viewers worldwide. Many people, especially younger generations, became familiar with the case through that documentary. But it is heartbreaking that the documentary completely overlooked crucial details that could have completely changed the way we understand the case. In that film, a lot of attention was given to theories surrounding the Ramsey family, such as the theory that JonBenét's brother Burke accidentally killed his sister in a fit of rage, or the theory that the parents were covering up the truth to protect Burke. But not once was there any mention of Chris Wolfe, a man whom Jacqueline, a key independent witness, repeatedly claimed had exhibited strange behaviors and had unexplained connections to the case. Gary Oliva, who once confessed to accidentally killing a little girl and was later found to have JonBenét's photos on him, was also absent from the film. Think about it. Why are suspects with criminal histories, who lived just blocks away from the Ramsey home, never mentioned in any major documentaries? This is a question that, I believe, no one can answer satisfactorily. And furthermore, Jacqueline, the woman who courageously stepped forward to accuse Chris Wolfe, has never been invited onto any major television program to share her story. Why? Could it be because what she says would completely disrupt the narrative that the media has constructed for so long? You see, media, when done right, is a powerful tool for exposing the truth. But when it is directed, it can also be a tool for concealing the truth and steering public opinion down the wrong path. Unfortunately, the JonBenét Ramsey case is a prime example of this. Perhaps, like me, you've noticed a pattern in many famous cases. When the media focuses too heavily on one line of investigation, they overlook all other avenues, even the most obvious evidence, if it doesn't fit the story they want to tell. And this is truly dangerous, because it leads the public to believe something that might not be the truth, while the real killer remains free. There's one more thing I think we need to make clear. Netflix or any major media company is a business. They can choose to tell a story in the most attention-grabbing way possible, the way that attracts the most viewers. And sometimes the most captivating, easiest story to tell is the one that places blame on the family, because nothing attracts viewers more than a perfect family falling apart due to a terrible secret. But Justice cannot be a hit movie. Justice isn't a compelling script. Justice is the truth, even if that truth is complex and hard to accept. And the truth about the JonBenét case, as we can see, is not simply what Netflix or other documentaries have presented to us. If the media had done its job right, they should have mentioned the unidentified foreign DNA, discussed Chris Wolfe, Gary Oliva, and other suspects whom Boulder police failed to investigate thoroughly, interviewed Jacqueline, the direct witness, to hear her side of the story, questioned the mistakes made by Boulder police on the first day of the investigation. But none of this happened. And the saddest part, as John Ramsey said, is that when false stories are repeated in the media, it not only hurts the victim's family, but it also makes the chance of discovering the truth smaller and smaller. So, what is our responsibility, those of us who are following this case, who refuse to forget JonBenét? We must speak up, demand that the media tell the full, honest story without cutting corners. We need to send letters, petitions, and demand that Boulder police collaborate with independent labs to re-examine the DNA. And most importantly, we must continue to speak about JonBenét as a victim who deserves protection, who deserves to know the truth, not just as a subject for entertainment on television. In the final part, I'll join you in discussing, is there still hope for justice? And what can we do to continue fighting for JonBenét's justice after nearly 3 decades of silence and failure? And now we come to the final part of this journey. A journey that I believe is not just about a case, but also about human nature, about justice, and about the responsibility we all carry. The question I want to pose to you, as well as to myself, is, after nearly 30 years, is there still hope for justice in the JonBenét Ramsey case? And we, the seemingly bystanders, what can we do to protect the truth for a 6-year-old girl? You see, when we look back at this case, there are things that make anyone's heart break. A little girl brutally murdered on Christmas night, in her very own home. A family thrust into the most horrific tragedy a family can face. And then, 28 years of flawed investigations, misguided theories, and unanswered questions. From the mistakes made by Boulder police in the first hours, when they failed to secure the crime scene, allowing family and friends to come and go freely, destroying all critical evidence, to ignoring suspects like Chris Wolf, Gary Oliva, and the foreign DNA that was never fully analyzed. All of this has turned the JonBenét case from a crime needing to be solved into a symbol of justice's failure. But is it too late to correct these mistakes? I think the answer is no. As I mentioned earlier, today's technology has far surpassed what investigators had in 1996. With next-generation DNA analysis, genetic genealogy, we can trace the killer's trail, even if the DNA sample left is very small. With will and determination, justice for JonBenét is still possible. But the problem is, Boulder police, the ones holding the DNA sample, have refused to cooperate. And that's why the role of the public, of people like you and me, is incredibly important. We must speak out. We must demand that the authorities in Boulder, the Boulder police, and the U.S. legal system take action. We must end the silence. We must get that DNA sample tested with the latest technology. It must be compared to all potential suspects. The investigation must be reopened in a fair, transparent way, truly driven by justice. Because if we stay silent, this case will forever fade into oblivion. And the real killer, the one who took the life of an innocent little girl, a little angel, will continue to live freely, possibly committing more crimes. My friends, I know, nearly 30 years have passed. Many might say that the past is the past and we should let it rest, but I don't believe that. Because a child killed without justice being pursued is a failure for all of us, for society as a whole. I believe that those of us who are of my age, who have lived through many decades and seen many major cases, understand one thing very well. Justice doesn't come on its own. The truth doesn't appear by itself. It only comes when there are people willing to step forward to seek it, demand it, and make sure it survives. And friends, we cannot allow this case to remain just old news, shallow documentaries, or pointless debates. JonBenét Ramsey is not a character in a story for entertainment. She was a victim, and she deserves to know the truth. Her family deserves to be freed from the suspicion that has plagued them for nearly 30 years. And society deserves an answer to one of the most heartbreaking cases in U.S. history. So, the final question I have for you, and for all those following this case, is: are you ready to speak out? Are you ready to demand that Boulder police collaborate with independent labs to re-examine the DNA? Are you ready to demand that the media stop exploiting this case as entertainment and instead tell it as a story demanding true justice? If your answer is yes, then let's start with the simplest actions. Sign petitions demanding the investigation be reopened. Write letters to the Boulder police chief, to the congressional representatives in Colorado, demanding their involvement. Share the truth about this case with your friends, family, and encourage them to speak up. Because if millions of people demand justice, no one can continue to ignore it. My friends, JonBenét deserves to be remembered, not for how she was taken from us, but for the truth being uncovered, for justice being served, and for all of us not turning our backs on a child who was brutally murdered.